Thank you everybody for coming. I really appreciate you guys showing up, or at least not leaving after the prefab talk. It's a tough act to follow, but here we go. My name is Bill Ramsour. I'm going to be talking about Addressable Assets. It's a system for building, loading, and managing your assets. So just as a show of hands, for who here is, this is your first exposure to addressables? Okay, a lot of you. Who here has either pulled it down or seen a previous talk or visited the forums maybe? Awesome, handful of you. Okay, so I think I've got some stuff for each group here. I'm going to start with an overview, a conceptual overview, and getting into some of the details. I will jump into the editor, but I'm not going to demo kind of the starting from scratch point. For those of you that this is just a totally brand new concept, if you leave here still somewhat interested, tomorrow at 1 o'clock, there's going to be a demo in the expo hall for how to set up kind of from scratch. And so I would really encourage you guys to go to that. I'm going to cover enough concepts here that you don't need that information now. But then I'm going to jump into the editor and show a couple of other things. Then I'm going to, in that kind of conceptual overview, then I'm going to talk about built-in hosting and our content and update workflow, and jump in and give a quick demo on that, and then talk about our roadmap, and should have a few minutes for questions at the end. So why addressables? Why did we make it? Why do you want it? Why do you care? First off, building and deploying large games. There's really three ways you can deal with assets in a Unity project right now. It's either direct references, so you actually have the thing referenced in your game code directly, loading things from resources, or loading things from asset bundles. The first two don't scale very well, and the third has some challenges. So one of the things Addressables does is it actually wraps asset bundles. Right now, most of the time, if you're using Addressables, you will be using asset bundles under the covers. Addressables is more than that, but it really tries to simplify things. It simplifies how things are built, how you build asset bundles or whatever it is you're building. And then the other piece of that is with that direct references or resources or asset bundles, everything's very coupled between where things are in your project, how things get built, and how things get loaded. Even if you're loading from asset bundles, you're loading by file path. There's just, all those systems are really intertwined. So if you want to change one aspect of things, you have to change everything. And so we wanted to decouple that and separate that out to make any game simpler, but also especially for large games. The next one is managing assets at runtime. If you are using asset bundles, there's a lot of dependency calculation to deal with. If you're loading a prefab, you've got to figure out, is that in an asset bundle? Where is that asset bundle? Do I need to download it? I need to load that. If it has any dependencies in other bundles, you have to deal with loading them. There's just a lot of nuisance to deal with there. And then asset memory management, on the same vein, making sure you unload things at the right time. If you do it too early, you're going to have things that get invalidated. If you do it too late, you get too much stuff in memory. And our goal with Addressables is to simplify that and really clean that up for you. And then the last one is iterating during development. There's two key aspects of iteration that I want to hit on that we really try to help with Addressables. One is play mode. If you're using asset bundles, there's a lot of challenges going in and out of play mode. You have built content, you have built data, and so in play mode, you're either trying to write your own infrastructure of code to fake things, or you're having to build asset bundles. And we wanted to deal with that for you. We also have the flexibility in play mode as kind of a key extension point that we made it to where we're actually running a build script, and you can customize that, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. And then the other key point on iteration during development is our local editor hosting. I'm going to talk a lot more about that later. So I don't actually want to get into it here. I'm just mentioning it to kind of give you a heads up. When I get to it, its main point is iterating during development. So what is Addressables? As I said at the very beginning on the first slide, it's a system for building, loading, and managing your content. And I put the sub-bullet here, name a thing, load a thing. Basically, the overarching idea of Addressables, the main premise, the main goal of it, is that you can have a thing, we'll say an asset, you give it an address, you give it a name. At that point, we are going to make sure it's part of the build. We are going to make sure you can load it. We are going to manage its memory. Now, most of the time, that is an asset. Most of the time in our system right now, actually in our system as we ship it, it's always an asset. But the point of addressables is that you can actually extend it beyond that. You could name something that you are going to generate on the fly, and your system says, I need this thing, and then you generate it. So the goal of it is to make it very simple so that you just have to name your asset, you give it an address, and we deal with building, loading, and managing. The other thing I want to mention here is that it is a C# package that works with 2018-2 and beyond. And the main thing I want to bring up here is that it is a C# package. When you get the package, you get the code. And so the intent of our system is to be very extensible. And I know a lot of times there's challenges with extending systems because you don't have access to the guts, so you don't really know what they're doing. Well, with ours, you do have access to the system. You can read through our code. You can see how our systems are handling it. So if you need to extend it, you can. If you need to take our code and change it to work for your game, you can if you need to customize things and work with things that way. It's built on 2 other packages. So when you get addressables, you get these other 2 packages, the scriptable build pipeline and the resource manager. I mainly mention them as they are the key kind of extensibility points. The first package obviously handles building. The second one is what handles providing things. When the system says, I need this thing, the resource manager is what figures out what it is. The other thing I want to mention about the scriptable build pipeline is that it really helps our asset bundle building. There's a lot of challenges in asset bundle building and complexities there, and this system kind of basically redoes that. And one of the big things it fixes is incremental building. So the first build of your asset bundles might actually be a smidge slower, but from then on, things should be significantly faster. And we've tested it on a lot of projects. If you find a project where it's slower, let us know, because we'll fix it. But in general, it should give you incredible improvements in your build time when we're talking about asset bundles. And then lastly, this is a very important one, all actions are asynchronous. As I said at the beginning of this slide, that the idea of addressables is you name a thing and you load a thing. So you've named an asset, my beautiful pony princess, and then at runtime you want to say instantiate my beautiful pony princess. The point of addressables is that your game code shouldn't care where that pony princess is. Is it on device, or is it something you have to download? Is it an actual asset, or is it being generated? Your game code shouldn't care. This is the decoupling of concerns that I mentioned earlier. To handle that, really the only way to do that responsibly is to be asynchronous. If your game code is going to count on something being there so that it feels good about doing a blocking synchronous call, and it's not actually there, then your game's going to just not do so well. So everything has to be asynchronous. It's one of our key kind of core principles. So I'm going to give a quick look at the UI here and then jump into the editor to go over some things. But this is the addressables window. There's a lot going on in here, but the main thing I want to hit on is there in the middle, there's kind of 4 groups. Within them are a bunch of entries or assets. And this is the view under which you manage the addresses of your assets. As I said, you give an asset an address. In this case, each of these things, done bolt enemy, explosion player, these are addresses that we have given to assets. And they're in groups. And I want to hit on what a group is, because that's an important concept within addressables. Basically, a group is a build time container. And right now, all a group has on it is data. So at edit time, you set up each group with the data you need. For example, one group might be set up to be built and loaded from streaming assets, so it's local assets. And another one might be set up to be remote. So if I look real quick at the inspector, this is how you set the data on a group. And I put a little highlight around one of the schemas. This one is the bundled asset group schema. The specific schema here doesn't matter, but the point is the way group data works is you can add schemas to it. And you can add, and you can mix and match, and you can remove. And the way the build works is the step, for example, that needs to build asset bundles will say, give me all the groups with the bundled asset group schema. And it'll get all those groups, and it'll build the asset bundles. And this gives a key for how we can make this system easily extensible and customizable and also data-driven. So with that, I'm actually going to jump into the editor and talk about how we organize some things, how you can customize some things, and how to analyze. So I've got the editor set up here in a pretty similar setup to how those screenshots were. I've got my Addressables window and my inspector here. Now, I want to talk about this data that I'm setting on the group is in the inspector. It's not in the Addressables window. And there are a couple of reasons for that. It just makes things nicer. But the key here is that the groups are their own asset. We originally, when we made Addressables, had all of our information stored in one big asset, but there were a lot of version control challenges there. And so we've broken it up, and there's actually a lot of assets that we create and store in your project. You shouldn't have to actually find them. If you're within the Addressables window and you select a group, we will find it for you in the project and put it in the inspector. From within that group, there's really one other thing that you care about other than the groups, which is the main top-level addressable asset settings object. And that's always available at the top of each group. You can double-click that, and it takes you there. So those are the main assets you're going to need to look at. Again, they are in your project. They're in your assets directory, but you shouldn't have to find them. So I want to talk a little bit about what is in them. So there's a lot of things going on in this top-level asset. I'm not going to talk about all these things, but I do want to hit on profiles. So a profile is a way for us to set data across all groups or across some number of groups that you can easily change in a centralized location. So if I actually go back to one of the groups, you can see that within the asset bundle settings, there's a question for a build path. And I don't actually edit this and type it in. It's selected as a variable from a dropdown. So these variables are profile variables. If I come back over here, you can see that remote build path. These are all the ones that were in the dropdown. The idea is that you could take all of the groups you want to be local and set their build path to be local build path, and all the ones you want to be remote build path. And that way, as you need to change that, as you need to change details of that, you don't have to go to each group. You can change it. And as you can see here, if I change which profile I'm editing, the data in here changes. And if I go back to the group and I change my active profile, down here is the evaluation of those variables. So if I jump over here to another one, another profile, it changes. And this is how you change the current profiles within the Addressables window. So while I'm in the editor, I want to talk a little bit about customization. As I mentioned earlier, schemas are the main way that you can change what data is on a group. You can create your own custom schemas. You can add them to groups. And then if you want to create custom build scripts to take advantage of that, our build scripts are now assets. They're scriptable objects that are on this main addressable asset settings object down here. And so we provide three. We provide fast, virtual, and packed mode as our build scripts. Now, originally, anyone that's already familiar with this will know that we used to have those just as kind of hard-coded modes, but now they're build scripts. And what those mean is if I come over here to my Addressables window, there's a play mode script dropdown. And that is the build script that will be run when I go into play mode. And so this determines, for example, if I'm in packed mode, I'm going to run a script that sets up my bundles and actually loads at runtime from asset bundles in the play mode. If I switch to fast mode, then I go into play mode, it's actually going to fake that. It's not going to build bundles. It's not going to load from bundles. It's just going to load from the asset database. And we changed this to be build scripts so that you can write your own build script. You can set it up to be play mode compatible, and you'll be able to use it here. Similarly, for the build script going into building the player, it's just in this dropdown. So only one of ours actually works for that context, but that's where you set that up. And so if you have a custom build script with custom schemas, you can do a lot of things. The most common thing we're asked about is encrypting bundles. And so you could easily add a schema that sets up whatever data you need to encrypt your bundles, and you could take our packed mode script and add a step in there to encrypt your bundles. It should be pretty straightforward. We are going to extend this system a lot in the future, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So the other side of customizability is loading time. So you've encrypted your bundles by creating a custom build. You need to be able to decrypt them when you load. So this is actually even more straightforward. The way you do it is by extending functionality of the resource manager. And so I want to hit on what that is. The premise of the resource manager is that it has this concept of providers. And so when you say, tell addressables, load my princess pony, it goes through the resource manager, and the resource manager has the capability to figure out what can provide this thing. And it looks at all the dependencies, and it figures all that out. But you can write custom providers pretty easily. And we actually have a setup here with the asset bundle group schema that you can specify the provider. So if you just inherit in your project, you create a class that inherits from the iResource provider, it'll show up in this list. And we have a sample project that is up on the forum that you can get that comes with an example of a custom provider that could be used for decryption. That's, again, the most common use case we've run into, and we wanted to provide an easy way to look at that. So the one last thing I want to look at here in the editor before I go back to the presentation is the Analyze button. So this is a new feature we've added recently. And so I click it, and it opens up a little sub-menu, sub-window within our main window here. And it's in its infancy. It's a little bit new right now. Right now it has one rule. But the idea is that we are going to add more rules, and we are going to expose it so that you guys can easily create your own custom rules. So what a rule is it's something that you execute in here that looks at all your data and finds problems. And ideally, I mean, how you write your own is up to you, but ours should all be able to fix themselves. So we have one rule right now, and it is the check duplicate bundle dependency rule. So let me give you a little bit of context for what that is. If you have two prefabs, and they both depend on the same texture, and you put one of the prefabs in an asset bundle and another prefab in a different asset bundle, they're both going to pull in that texture and duplicate it. So when you load those things at runtime, you're actually going to have that texture duplicated in memory. The way to fix that is that you explicitly put that texture in either one of those two bundles or in its own bundle. But it has to be in a bundle explicitly to not be duplicated. So we want to be able to check for that because we don't want you to have a bunch of duplicated assets in your project. So in this case, I'm going to click Run Tests here. And it turns out, once it finishes, that between my two groups, local demo and space shooter data, within this local demo data bundle, there are some textures and materials that are in there that were also in the space shooter demo group. So I'm going to click Fix All here. And I will say, moving forward, as there's more rules, as we make it extensible, we're going to make the UI a lot better to handle more nuanced control than just a run all and fix all. But what it did when I clicked Fix All was it created a new group, and it put those materials and textures in it. So I can click this. And so I want to hit on two things about this before we move on. One is that it is expensive. This chest basically does a full build. It does everything except actually writing out the asset bundle files. So it's a slow process. You're not going to want to run it all the time. And because we know it's slow, we are going to make it so you can run it batch mode. Right now it is just in this window. But it will be something that you guys can run batch mode. You can run your custom tests. But the other thing I want to hit on is why do we even have this where you click Run, you click Fix, rather than just put it as part of the build, something that just happens? Well, one of our core goals with addressables is to remove hidden magic. We're fine with you clicking a Fix button and us doing some magic that fixes things, but we want to make sure you click the Fix It button. We don't want to do any systems where you click Build and we figure out something's wrong and we do some magic and change things under the covers and then give you a build and you don't know what you got. We really want to avoid that. We're really trying to avoid any sort of magical things happening for you. So we do this as a separate step so that you can hit Fix It, you can see the results, and you might decide, you know what, I actually want this texture duplicated, so I'm going to remove it. Or I might want to remove these around into some other group, so I'm going to drag it around in this window. Whatever the case may be, we want to give you that power to do manually, to manually touch things after we've done the magic on them. So with that, I will jump back into PowerPoint here. And I'm going to talk about editor hosting first, and then our content update, and then give a quick demo on that. So what is editor hosting? Addressables comes with an HTTP host that runs out of the editor. This gives you the ability to host and provide your content, your asset bundles, your whatever, from the editor without having to set up your own CDN or server or anything like that. It is integrated with Addressables, and I just mentioned this because as I go through this demo, I'm going to talk a lot about profiles and the editor hosting because they're really coupled and they work well together. And lastly, it's very extensible and customizable. So if you need to host things in a different way, if you need to provide content in some special manner or some other kind of content, it should be really easy to do. So let me walk through a couple examples of how things might be set up to hopefully make this make a lot more sense. So in this case, this is how I want to ship my game. I've got my actual player data, the executable, all that kind of stuff, and I've got a bunch of local content, things that I've set up to be local bundles, and then I've got my remote content on myinternet.com. So the way I do that is I set up my profile to have my remote build path and load paths pointing to this server data folder and this hosting website. But this is my production setup. I don't want to do this while I'm developing my game, while I'm iterating on my game. So I can change my profile to point to editor hosting. And in the editor, I turn on hosting. And now, without having to edit my groups, I'm able to simulate what the real deployment of my game will be like without really having to set much up at all. And it should mostly work. Another way I can use these profiles is to actually change my remote data to be set up to be local. By changing the remote build and load paths to point to streaming assets, now I have a self-contained player. If I need to give that to an external customer or get it out to QA or whatever, and they just want something completely self-contained, I can easily do that using profiles. And now if I combine this idea of mucking with the profiles with what we can do with editor hosting, this is probably the most valuable use case we think of. The main reason we created editor hosting is to set up both local and remote things to use editor hosting. Now, obviously, you're not going to deploy your game like this, but during testing, this gives you the ability to have a very, very lightweight player. Your player is really just your code or whatever scenes and resources you might happen to have in the build. But this gives you the ability, if you are a content creator, a level designer, or artist, you can deploy this lightweight player to a device and then not deploy it again until someone gives you new code for whatever reason. As you're iterating on levels, as art, and whatever, you just rebuild your content in the editor, close the game, relaunch the game, and it's going to get the new content. If you are the coder, on the other hand, and you need to be editing code and then deploying it to device, you're now only building this small lightweight player, and you're only deploying the small lightweight player. If you're using asset bundle caching, you don't even have to re-download the content. You'll redeploy the player, relaunch it, and all the content that was hosted should actually be there if it hasn't changed. Now, I next want to talk about the update workflow. This is how to handle changes in your content post-launch. And I probably shouldn't have said post-launch because this workflow applies even in the scenario I was just talking about, the scenario where I have built a player and deployed it onto a test device, and now I'm this artist that's updating content in the editor. It's anytime you have deployed a player and you can't change that player and you need to deal with updated content. So there's two steps involved, a prepare step and a build step. And both of them require a previous build. When we do a build, when we build the player, we sneak a little bit of extra data in there so that we know some things about the player, some things about what the content was when you built that player, so that we can fix things as needed during updates. And then I want to hit on this static keyword. When we do the prepare step, there's something we look for within the groups, and that is the keyword static. Originally, we had called that local, that basically when you were setting up your data, you would tell us these bundles are going to be local, these bundles are going to be remote. We changed it to static because there are times when you might have some really, really big remote bundle that you only want someone to download once, even if some things have changed in it. So you don't want that bundle to ever change. And so the prepare step needs to look at that to figure out how's it going to fix things that you've done. So again, I'm going to walk through some examples here, and then I'm going to jump into the editor and show something. So scenario number one here is that I've built two versions of my app. They're both deployed, they're both out in the world, and I have up on my server two versions of the content. Now, I will point out before we even get into updating that the way Addressables figures out what asset actually matches my pony princess is through what we call a content catalog. And that catalog is with all the bundles, so that content catalog is up on these servers. And the version 1 of the app knows to look for the version 1 of the catalog, and the version 2 of the app knows to look for version 2 of the catalog. So you're not going to get things fighting on your server. In this case, we've got V1 and V2 content on the server. They're not going to conflict. They're not going to fight. V1 of the app will only load the correct things. But V2 of my app has a yellow airplane, and I decided that looks a lot better than the original airplane, but a lot of people are still using the original app. Maybe they can't update for whatever reason, they can't update it, and I want to change V1 content to have the yellow airplane. Well, in this case, I only need to do the build for content update. And when I do that, it's going to build a new remote bundle, and it's going to change that content catalog. So next time the player launches their V1 app, and the app says, when they launch, the app's going to find the new content catalog. And when the app says load airplane, the catalog's going to say, hey, my airplane's online, it's in this new bundle, download it, and away we go. Now let's walk through a slightly more complicated scenario. The airplane's local. You made a mistake, you shipped it with the game, and now you want to update it, and we need to handle that. So in this case, we first do the prepare for update, and then we do the build for update. And what this will do is it'll actually it'll detect that this airplane has changed, pull it out into a new group, and then when you do build for content update, it's going to build that into new bundle and put it up on the server. Now notice that the black airplane is still on the user's device. You can't get rid of it, but the content catalog no longer knows about it. So when the game says instantiate airplane, it's going to say, oh, I know where that airplane is. It's on the internet. I need to download it and instantiate it. Now this use case here is one of the key reasons that asynchronous loading and doing everything asynchronously is really important. Because when you shipped this game and when you wrote the code for your game, the airplane was local. And you knew you'd have it, so you knew you could block when you loaded it. But we just changed things out from under the game. The code doesn't know. The code doesn't care. Because it's asynchronous, everything works. So with that, I'm going to jump into the editor and show you a demo. So I'm going to get rid of this thing that I fixed here. And in this scenario, I'm a fantastic indie developer that took Unity's space shooter demo, added addressables to it, and then shipped it to the Steam store, because that seemed like a good business model. So I've got this out there in the Steam store, and my reviews are very negative. My theory is that it's because it's kind of a dark and gloomy game. So I'm going to make it a little happier. So I want to make the airplane happier. So I have the texture here of the spaceship. And so I'm going to make it happy. That looks a lot happier, I think. I'm going to overwrite that. Take a look at this. By the way, if you're in the Addressables window, you can double-click on any of your assets and see them. And that looks a lot happier, I think. I think this is going to take me from very negative to mixed. That's my goal. So I go in here and I do prepare for content update. And like I said, it asks me for the old build. I find this file. This is their secret magical file that has all kinds of data that we need. So I open it, and it's going to tell me, hey, we've detected a change with this asset. Would you like this moved to a new group? And I'll say, sure, what a good idea. And now that spaceship is no longer in local demo data. It's in this content update. And I do want to mention local demo data. If we look at it, it has this static content checked. And if we come over here to this content update, static content is not checked, and it's already set up to be remote. And I have it set up. I'm using a profile that is editor hosted. So I now haven't touched my deployed build. The files in here haven't been touched, haven't been changed, but they still know to connect to my editor hosting. And I can rerun my game. And let's see if I get a happy spaceship. I didn't get a happy spaceship. Oh, I know why. I skipped a step. I told you guys there were 2 steps, and I only did one of them. So I did the prepare for update. Now you got to do build for update. Again, it asks for the build. It's going to actually build the content this time. It's important to do both steps. And let's see if this one goes better. All right, look how happy that looks. This is definitely a mixed review caliber game now. So I do want to hit on, once again, that was 2 steps. We didn't do anything magical for you. We don't want to have one step where we magically fix your data, move some things around into different groups, and then do a build. Just like with the analyze step, we want to make sure that we make you click the button before we do the magic. And then before we actually do the build, you get to see the results of that click. You get to see the results of the magic. And you can tell what happened and if you're happy with it. So with that, I'll come back over here. And I'm going to talk about the roadmap and what's coming up. So I do want to answer the main question, the main reason people ask us for a roadmap at all, I think, most of the time is, should I use this for my game? It's not really as much about when are things actually coming out, but should I even use this thing? So the answer we've been saying for a while, and the answer that we continue to give is, if you're shipping in 2018, no. If you're shipping in the first half of 2019, maybe. And if you're shipping after the second half of 2019, then yeah, go for it. So what's the maybe? Well, if you're just using addressables in a very kind of simple way, at a very basic level, then you should be good to go shipping in the first half of 2019. If you need to extend things, if you need to write custom build scripts, custom pieces of it, if you need to take advantage of some advanced features, those are still in flux. Those are still coming online. And so we recommend not you taking advantage of it if you're shipping in that time frame. Now, this does mean you can still use it now, and you can still play with it, and ideally integrate it into your game. If your game is shipping in 8 months, then pull it down, integrate it. You should be great. You should be set. So what's actually coming? In the 2018 cycle, we're a preview package. I will mention that the package does not show up in the package manager UI yet. We're intending to have that by the end of the year. As of now, if you want the package, you do have to edit. In your packages directory, there's a manifest.json. You edit that to add the package to it. Once you've done that, it will show up in the UI, and you can get all the updates from within the UI, but you do have to do that one time. But soon, it should be in the package manager UI. As far as work through the end of the year, we're really just focusing on stability and feature refinement. So we are not going to be adding really new features this calendar year beyond what I showed you guys here today. And it really should be focusing on stability. In the 2019 cycle, we are going to revamp the way we do the build script. I showed you there's those assets of the data builders and the play modes. So we're going to actually extend that and make it even more powerful, more extensible for you guys. We want to make it really easy for you guys to take an existing script and add a encrypt data bundles step. Right now, it's very doable, but there's some hoops you have to jump through, and we want to fix that. So we are going to revamp the build script. And we're also looking at replacing the asset bundle format. As I said, Addressables does wrap asset bundles right now, but it's intended to be more than that. Asset bundles have some challenges. They have some overhead. They have some complexity around how you set them up can affect your memory. And there's just some things that have to be done with a little more involvement from you than we would like. And so we're looking at coming up with we're working on a new file format that'll make building and loading just kind of work right. That the memory works out to where when you load things, you get just what you need in memory, and you don't get extra things in memory. You don't have to worry about things. And so we're cleaning that up by replacing the asset bundle format. Now, the old asset bundle format will still be there, but if you're using addressables, you'll be able to check a little checkbox and switch. That's one of the advantages of moving to addressables now, is that as we come up with things that change under the covers, you can just enable it, and you'll get it. So with that, I really want to say thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. You can go out and try it now, and please hit us up on the forums to give feedback. That's the forum. I try to stay on top of it. The team tries to stay on top of it. And we'd really love your feedback, any kind of alleged bug reports or ideas for improvement. We really appreciate that on the forum. Also, reminder, come to the talk tomorrow at the expo floor at 1. I will not be giving the talk, but I will be there. So if you want to continue the conversation, we can do that. And then this is what you do if you need to edit the manifest.json. That's the line you have to add. So with that, I will open it up for questions. So head to the back there. There's mics in the back. And afterwards, I will be outside for a while. Thanks. All right.
So I started using addressables with 18.2, excuse me, because I was bringing a project forward into 18.2 that used the Asset Bundle Manager.
OK.
And got all sorts of deprecation warnings and such like that. Messaging might be a little bit better around that. There was no clear guidance on whether I should just fix the problems with the Asset Bundle Manager and move, stay where I was, or move forward into addressables.
Right.
I went forward to addressables, and I like what I see so far. So.
OK. Well, thanks for the feedback. The one statement he did make to point out to everybody, the Asset Bundle Manager is deprecated. It doesn't quite work with the newest Unity, and I would definitely recommend switching to addressables. This side, I guess.
Yes, I was wondering how much there was in terms of compatibility checking with the online catalog, i.e. if you change a script on an asset and then publish that.
So our intent is to do the compatibility checking. So the question is, as you do content updates, how do you make sure that the script hasn't, the scripts are still compatible? So our idea there is to actually do that when we do the build for content update, to warn you, hey, you've pointed us to this build. Your scripts don't match this build. The type tree has changed, or some of the things have changed that this isn't going to work. And so our goal is to detect that at build time rather than at load time.
Cool, thank you.
Hi. So with the API design, focusing on trying to encapsulate these things and remove a lot of the manual labor and details, just for some context for my question, a situation that we've run into before is a platform puts like a requirement that we have to let the user know before a large data download or something like that, and then based on their response, either do the download or not do the download. Situations like that, is the API design considering having hooks and various things available to be able to accommodate stupid situations?
We have, so the question is, how do we figure out as we're loading things, is there ability to warn the user and things like that? So we have, for one, there's a lot of preload functionality that I didn't get into here, as far as being able to pre-download things before you need them. As far as knowing the size, we had looked into basically recording size data so that you could ask, how big is this thing before I download it. We haven't actually gotten that in because we've actually been in talks also with app stores that have suggested that we have to tell the user how much we're going to download, and there's some complexities around what does that even mean, and how would you do that in a game that's downloading something every time the user interacts with something. So there's a lot of uncertainty around what is actually expected from the app stores there, so we haven't refined that feature exactly. But all the data should be available. As we get clarity, we will definitely implement what we need to on our end. But again, the intent is that the system is very extensible, and hopefully, if we don't provide it, you can make it work. So.
Yeah. Clarification on the roadmap. Is there a difference between the Unity version 2018 and upgrading to 2019?
Oh, so our intention is to have addressables work with 2018.2 moving forward. There are some caveats there. For example, the replacement to the asset bundle format will not be something that would be backported. So if you were using addressables with 18.2, you would have to use asset bundles. If you updated your project to whenever we have the new format, then you could check that checkbox. So in general, addressables should work with 18.2 or 18.3. We really want to make sure we lock things in as we get towards this 2018 LTS version. But there might be some features that are enabled or disabled as you do or do not upgrade to 2019.
Thank you.
So building on the question that was just asked here, so if there's a large data file on a server that I want to download, once, but then store it locally, is that possible at all with addressables until the user wants to download a new file to read that?
Yeah. So the question's about downloading and saving things. So the asset bundle system does come with caching, and within the group data that you're setting settings on the group, we do expose a lot of those settings, how you're going to cache things, how you want that handled. And so if you do have some giant bundle, you can also very easily preload it, so you can download it when app first launch or something like that, and have it cached. And a large remote bundle is also the example where you might want to mark that as static, and so that if you change one small thing in it, maybe you create one small little bundle, they still keep the giant one cached, and you download this additional one with the change. So that should all work.
Got it, and that'll just overwrite the bundle that's already downloaded every time if I pull it a second or a third time at some point.
So if there's a new bundle, if that giant bundle is replaced and you've put an updated version up there, then yes, it should re-download it and replace that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, hi, a few questions. Is there a possibility that you'll have platform-specific bundles, let's say?
So when you build asset bundles, they are built for the platform. So when you build with addressables, it does need to know about the platform, and it will build the data specifically for that platform.
Well, in that case, then, is it possible to have file formats that aren't typically understood by Unity integrated into these?
So as far as dealing with other file formats, really, this might be something we can talk a bit more in detail outside, but the high-level answer is if you have something really weird your game's trying to do, a custom provider should be able to handle that. If you need it to not, like if it can't be built into asset bundles, and for example, if you need a provider to provide raw video files from a server, right? You could provide a format that says addressables.load my video, and it finds it on the server and does it. So there's a lot of things like that you can do if you have kind of special cases.
And will the file format be exposed, will it be opened?
So asset bundles currently are, and the new thing that we're working towards is something that would be completely usable outside of addressables if you needed it to be.
And the last thing,
Okay.
callbacks. You didn't really mention what type of callbacks or what type of callback mechanism you had with respect to the asynchronous nature of the calls.
So the thing returned whenever you do anything with addressables, whether it's load or instantiate or whatever, is an async operation, and it's got a completed callback and a couple of other bits of data. And they'll actually show that in the talk tomorrow at 1 o'clock. So if you go to that in the expo floor, they'll get into that a little bit more of just kind of actually executing this at the basic level.
Sweet. Thank you very much.
After you turned your spaceship into a happy spaceship, I noticed that you were going through the processes of, if I'm understanding it correctly, creating a bin file. Was that bin file being generated by the process you were?
So we're actually reading the bin file. That binary file is created by us when we do a player build. And that stores off information about what's in the player build, so that we can figure out, some of your assets changed, or maybe the type tree's changed and this isn't going to work, or whatever data we need so that you can update later, we create in that binary file up front.
Okay, so you're not updating that binary file with the fact that you changed the spaceship?
Correct.
Okay. I was going to ask if we needed to send out that little file to every one of our players if they needed to know, hey, there's a happy spaceship to get.
No, so the thing I didn't show, but there is a content catalog file. So that file is what shows up on the server and local, and that's what the system actually uses to look at. So there is a file that's updated, but that file is put with the bundles and whatever else gets generated during the update build.
All right, thank you.
Hi. Will the extension points, like the providers that you talked about, will they be able to access the content catalog and any other associated manifests in case you need more control over, say you don't want to use the automatic caching system for whatever reason, and you want to implement your own? Will there be sufficient extension points for us to do that?
There should be able to be plenty of extension points. So the thing I didn't really mention or hit on is that the way the providers know what to do is through, there's what the resource manager has a concept of a location. And so that location has information about itself and all of its dependencies. And that location is set up during build. So if you need to do some custom things during load, you can probably actually set up some custom locations during build. And that would be the main way to have your data kind of hidden. And all that location data is in the content catalog.
Is the location data established at build time?
Yes. Yeah.
So you can't change it dynamically?
No, not without an update, probably.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Sounds like we're out of time. I'm going to be out there at the Q&A stand, whatever the sign is out there for a while. If you have any more questions, please hit me up out there. Thank you, guys.